The first witness called at Brannelle's trial was the chair. It stood alone in the center of the hall of branches, its carved arms wrapped in silver chains, as if the court feared that a piece of furniture might flee before giving evidence. 3 evenings earlier, that chair had waited beside King Faerren at the Feast of Returning Stars. Every elf in the palace had known what it meant. No one had occupied it in 112 years. Then Brannelle, a quiet human translator whom most courtiers had never bothered to notice, had crossed the banquet floor and sat down. Now the king watched her from the black-root throne above the judges. His long silver hair lay over the dark collar of his mourning coat, and the thin crown of living thornwood cast narrow shadows across his face. He looked exactly as he had at the feast, dangerous, controlled, and impossible to read. Yet Brannelle had learned that stillness could conceal many things: rage, grief, or a man holding an entire kingdom together with both hands, while everyone mistook the effort for cruelty. "State your crime," Chancellor Aurelian ordered. Brannelle stood between 2 guards. The iron clasp around her wrist suppressed neither strength nor movement. It suppressed language. Whenever she tried to speak an unapproved word, the metal tightened until her fingers went numb. The elves called it a courtesy shackle because it drew no blood. She looked at the chained chair and answered with the 3 words the clasp permitted. I sat down. A murmur passed through the galleries. Aurelian's mouth hardened. Beside the king. There was nowhere else. It was not entirely true. Brannelle had meant to give her own place to Messina, an exhausted young courier. She had not known the empty chair was an altar, a warning, and a wound. Aurelian descended 1 step. The Seat of Concord is reserved for the sovereign's equal. By occupying it, a human commoner invited the ancient bond and challenged every noble house. Then your signs should be clearer, Brannelle said. The shackle constricted. Pain ran to her elbow, but laughter escaped from the highest gallery before the court strangled it into silence. King Faerren's gaze dropped to the iron around her wrist. Aurelian continued. Did an enemy instruct you? No. Did you intend to ensnare His Majesty? No. Did you know that the last person seated there was Queen Iliel? For the first time, the king moved. Only 1 finger, tightening against the throne, but every leaf in the vaulted ceiling shivered. Brannelle swallowed. I learned her name after the soldiers took me. The chancellor faced the galleries as though her ignorance proved guilt. Queen Iliel died when the Concord shattered. Since that night, anyone who touches her chair hears the king's death song and loses the will to live. 6 intruders have tried. None survived until dawn. Brannelle had heard something when she sat beside Faerren, but it had not been a death song. Beneath the clatter of goblets and the shocked intake of 200 breaths, she had heard a woman whisper through the chair's carved vines, "Do not let them crown the silence." She had also felt Faerren's arms settle along the back of the chair, not touching her, but shielding her from courtiers who rose with hands on ceremonial blades. He had stared at her as if she had returned from his oldest nightmare carrying an answer. Aurelian raised a document. The law requires execution before moonrise unless the sovereign claims the trespasser as his political equal. His Majesty will not profane his dead queen's memory for a stranger. Do you offer any final defense? Brannelle looked at Faerren. He had not spoken to her during 3 days of confinement. He had sent a healer for her bruised wrist, and returned the untouched food she had refused, warmed each time. But silence was not rescue. Silence was what powerful people used when they wanted clean hands. Yes, she said. Ask the chair why the queen was murdered. The chains snapped, not broke, unfastened. Every silver link opened at once and fell across the floor like rain. Pale roots burst from the chair legs, raced between the tiles, and climbed the throne. The court scattered. Guards dragged Brannelle backward, but the courtesy shackle split around her wrist. A voice filled the hall. Not loud, yet unmistakable. The kingdom has mistaken obedience for peace. Faerren rose. The roots reached his boots and stopped. The queen's voice spoke again. The one who sat without hunger for power may hear what power buried. Give her 7 days. If she fails, the Concord dies with the king. Green light flashed through the rafters. Then the roots withdrew, leaving the chair unbound, and the court more frightened of Brannelle than before. Aurelian recovered first. A deception. "No," Faerren said. His voice was low, but it ended every whisper. He came down from the throne and stopped before Brannelle. Up close, she saw sleeplessness beneath his severe eyes and a pale line crossing his throat, the remnant of a wound hidden by his collar. He held out his hand without commanding her to take it. "Queen Eliel used a phrase known only to us," he said. 7 days ago, the western wards began to fail. In 7 more, the boundary around this city will collapse. You heard her before the rest of us. Will you help me discover what she buried?" Brannelle looked at his open hand, then at the judges who had prepared to kill her for sitting in the wrong place. "On conditions." Shock returned to the galleries in a sharper wave. One corner of Faerren's mouth almost moved. "Name them." "No shackles, no locked room. Messina and the human servants leave the palace safely whether I succeed or fail. I see every record concerning the queen's death, and if your law demands my life at the end of 7 days, you will tell me yourself, not send your chancellor." Faerren did not glance at Aurelian. Agreed. Only then did Brannelle take his hand. The moment their palms met, the empty chair behind them bloomed. White flowers opened from dead wood, each with a drop of black nectar at its center. Faerren released her at once. The blossoms remained. That was how a human translator became the most dangerous woman in the Elven court. Not by seeking a crown, but by demanding terms before accepting a king's protection. An hour later, Brannelle followed Faerren through a passage concealed behind the throne. The walls were grown from interlaced roots, whose luminous veins pulsed with the failing ward. Faerren carried no escort. He had dismissed even the guards, which Brannelle considered either trust or arrogance. "What is the Concord?" she asked. "A covenant between the first rulers and the forest beneath the city. It translates consent into protection. When the monarch and the chosen equal govern in accord, the ward recognizes that no single will controls Sylvaren." "Chosen by whom?" "Originally, by the people. Later by noble electors. Eventually, by whoever could survive the chair." His expression turned bitter. "Tradition is often corruption that has learned ceremonial language." Brannelle studied him. The feared Elven King had just insulted the foundation of his own authority. "And Queen Eliel?" "My elder sister." Brannelle stopped. At the trial, Aurelian had allowed everyone to assume the dead queen had been Faerren's wife. The intimacy of the empty chair, the stories of a shattered bond, even the title of queen had shaped that conclusion. Faerren saw it happen across her face. "Our crown passes to the eldest child without regard to sex," he explained. "Eliel ruled. I was her sworn equal and commander, not her consort. The Seat of Concord belonged to me until she died. When I took the throne, the chair beside me remained empty because the covenant rejected every candidate the nobles offered. So sitting there was not a marriage proposal. No. Good." This time his mouth did move, a brief, unwilling curve gone almost before she saw it. "Was that your principal concern?" Execution remained slightly ahead. They continued into the Queen's sealed archive. The round chamber smelled of cedar and cold ash. Thousands of memories hung inside glass leaves, each record visible only when touched by someone authorized. Faerren placed his palm against the central trunk. Nothing opened. "The archive stopped recognizing me after Eliel's death," he said. Brannelle approached the trunk. Human translators were employed in elven courts because humans could not hear the forest song that influenced elven meaning. That supposed deficiency made them useful neutral witnesses. Brannelle had spent 9 years converting ornate threats into plain treaty language. She knew that what one culture called absence might be another kind of freedom. She pressed 2 fingers to the bark. The archive screamed. Images spilled through her. Iliel arguing with Aurelian beside a basin of black water. Faerren collapsing under silver arrows. Human villages burning beyond the western boundary. A hand wearing the chancellor's seal pouring ink into the roots. Then the vision broke, throwing Brannelle against the floor. Faerren caught her before her head struck stone. His arm held her shoulders, firm but careful. "What did you see?" She smelled winter cedar on his coat. His face was close enough that fear could have become something else if either of them allowed it. Brannelle shifted upright, and he let her go immediately. "Fragments. Your sister knew the wards were being poisoned. You were wounded. There were burning human settlements. There were no human settlements within the western boundary. There are now." Faerren's eyes sharpened. For 60 years, the forest had withdrawn from human roads, and Sylvaren maps marked the western valley as empty. Yet Brannelle's mother, Brannissa, had been born in a village hidden there. She had taught Brannelle an old lullaby with no human words, only 7 notes that made flowers turn toward the singer. Brannelle had never told anyone. "My mother came from that valley before your queen died. She said her people lived under trees that remembered promises." Faerren stood very still. "Sing the song." "I do not sing. You sat in the Concord chair before 200 armed elves. Courage and musical talent are unrelated. The walls will endure." She gave him a flat look, then sang the 7 notes under her breath. Every glass leaf in the archive turned toward her. A memory opened above them. Queen Iliel appeared in pale green light, older than Faerren but bearing the same severe brow. Beside her stood a human woman with Brannelle's eyes. Brannissa. Brannelle forgot to breathe. The memory could not see its witnesses. Iliel knelt beside a diseased root, while Brannissa mixed black salt with her bare hands. "The poison enters through commands," Brannissa said. "Every order given without true assent darkens the conquered. Your nobles have forced villages to surrender children as bondservants, then called their silence agreement. The ward is feeding on a lie." Iliel touched the blackened root. "If I expose the houses, they will destroy the human witnesses. If you do not, the forest will destroy everyone." The queen looked toward the memory's edge. "Faerren believes force can protect what truth cannot. He is wrong, but he can learn. If I fail, take the listening seed beyond the border. Give it to someone the forest cannot command." Brannissa closed her fingers around a small white seed. The memory vanished. Brannelle's hand went to the pendant beneath her gown. Her mother had left it to her on her deathbed, a plain wooden bead Brannelle had never managed to open. Now a seam glowed along its center. Faerren stared at it, then lowered his head. "My sister trusted your mother, and my court erased her." "Did you know about the bondservants?" "No. That is not the same as being innocent." Pain crossed his face, clean and unhidden. "No, it is not." Brannelle expected defense. Kings usually wrapped failure in reasons until it resembled duty. Faerren offered none. The pendant opened in her palm. Inside lay a white seed no larger than a tear. The archive roots leaned toward it but could not touch. "The forest cannot command you," Faerren said. "That is why the chair did not kill you. The death song forces an elven mind to surrender. A human hears only grief." Then the 6 intruders were elves. Yes, nobles seeking legitimacy. And your court preferred a legend about your murdered queen to admitting ambitious lords killed themselves on a chair. Fear is politically convenient. For a feared king. He met her gaze. especially for one. Faerren moved Brannelle into a guest chamber with a door that locked from inside. He stationed no guards, only left a bell carved from bonewood on the table. Ring once for a servant, twice for me. Does the feared king answer bells? This week, apparently. She woke before dawn to find him sitting outside her door. He had not entered. A black stain had appeared along his throat, branching from the old scar. The failing ward was killing him because the sovereign's body anchored it. He had hidden the worsening mark beneath his collar, until pain made concealment impossible. Brannelle crouched opposite him. How long? The healers predicted 12 days when it began. And you gave me 7. I dislike optimistic estimates. She reached toward the mark, then stopped. May I? His surprise revealed how rarely anyone asked before touching a king. He nodded. Her fingers rested against the warm skin below his jaw. The white seed in her pendant pulsed. For a moment, she heard the ward inside him. Thousands of voices repeating yes in tones of terror, exhaustion, hunger, and resignation. Beneath them, Faerren's own will stood like a locked door. She drew back. The Concord is using coerced assent as fuel. You are resisting it, so it is consuming you. Can the seed cleanse it? Perhaps. But my mother said it had to be given to someone the forest could not command. If I plant it, the Concord may attach itself to me instead. Then we find another way. He answered too quickly for calculation. Brannelle looked at him. You would risk the city rather than use me? I would risk my throne before turning a person into a tool without her consent. The city is not mine to gamble, and neither are you. Something shifted between them, not trust yet, but the first place trust might grow. On the second day, they left the palace disguised as minor officials. Brannelle wore a gray cloak. Faerren braided his silver hair and concealed his ears beneath a hood. He looked less like a king and more like a blade pretending to be ordinary. They entered the rootless quarter, where human dyers, mixed-blood artisans, and elves without house allegiance crowded bridges woven through enormous trees. Here, no one recognized Faerren. Brannelle watched him see his city without the space fear normally cleared around him. Their destination was a dye house owned by Messina's aunt, the only survivor Brannelle knew from the Western Valley. Messina had left the palace safely under Faerren's order, but she returned when she learned of Brannelle's sentence. Quiet loyalty, Brannelle realized, could be more stubborn than royal command. Messina led them beneath vats of indigo to a hidden room. Names covered the walls, hundreds of human children taken into elven houses as payment for protection. Each had signed a bond in green ink. Each signature fed the ward. Faerren read until his concealed hands began to shake. My decrees outlawed inherited service, he said. The houses call it educational guardianship, Messina replied. Your inspectors accept their records. Brannelle watched him confront the machinery between command and reality. A law is not what a king writes. It is what the powerless must survive. Faerren removed his signet ring and placed it on the table. Copy every name. My private guard will move the children before the houses know we have the list. Messina did not touch the ring. And if your private guard belongs to one of those houses? The king had no answer. Brannelle did. We use the kitchen network. Servants enter every estate, share delivery routes, and are ignored while nobles speak. Messina can carry instructions. No royal seals. No commands. Each child must be asked whether they want to leave. Faerren looked at her with a mixture of admiration and discomfort. You built a rebellion between breakfast and noon. A rescue. The distinction depends on who writes the record. By sunset, 43 children had chosen to leave. The nobles discovered the operation before the last group escaped. Houseguards cornered Brannelle and Faerren on a suspended market bridge, while below them, the forest dropped into luminous mist. Aurelian's nephew, Lord Vale, stepped forward with 6 archers. Your Majesty, the human has enchanted you. Surrender her, and we can conceal this humiliation." Faerren pushed back his hood. The quarter fell silent. "You mistake my listening for enchantment," he said. "That reveals more about your service than her influence." Vale ordered the archers to aim. Although sovereign magic would feed the corruption, Faerren drew power through the roots. The bridge bent around the arrows, and vines seized the guards. When it settled, Faerren dropped to one knee. Brannelle caught him. Black veins spread beneath his skin. "You said you would find another way," she whispered. "For you," he managed. "I made no such promise about myself." Anger rose because fear had found nowhere else to go. "That is not nobility. It is another form of deciding alone." She placed the white seed against his scar. It drew some darkness from him, turning gray at one tip. Pain struck her in return, a chorus of coerced voices flooding her mind. Faerren tried to pull away, but she held on until both could stand. They escaped through the dye tunnels with the children. In the shelter beneath the old amphitheater, Faerren sat among people trained to fear him. No throne separated his mistakes from their consequences. One child asked whether he had known. He answered no. Another asked why not. He answered, "Because those who benefited from your silence were the people I trusted to report it, and because I did not come here to ask." It was not absolution. It was the beginning of accountability. If this moment of hard-won trust speaks to you, stay with Brannelle and Faerren, as the cost of that empty chair is finally revealed. On the third night, Brannelle found Faerren awake beside the shelter entrance, watching false stars painted on the underground ceiling. She sat beside him on the stone, leaving a careful space between them. "You dislike chairs now?" he asked. "I have learned caution." A disappointing development. She smiled despite herself. After a while, he said, "Eliel was the brave one. She could enter a furious council and make every person believe truth had been their own idea. I commanded armies because armies are simpler than grief. Why did the court imply she was your wife? A king mourning a lost beloved inspires devotion. A younger brother who failed his sister invites judgment. Aurelian shaped the story, and I allowed it, because fear kept challengers from the chair. 6 elves died. They came knowing the risk, but yes, I let the legend kill them." He looked at his hands. "You should know what sits beside you." Brannelle considered moving away. Instead, she reduced the space between them by the width of one hand. "And you should know, I am not here because I think remorse makes you harmless." "Why are you here?" "Because when you had the power to use me, you refused. Because you answered the children without asking them to comfort you. Because my mother trusted your sister, and I need to know what killed them both." "Branissa died?" 5 years ago. Her lungs slowly turned to wood. Human healers had no name for it. Faerren closed his eyes. Ward blight. The poison followed her beyond the border. Brannelle had imagined many causes for her mother's death. Winter sickness, dye fumes, simple injustice. Learning that Sylvaren's corruption had reached across years to claim her made grief feel newly sharpened. Faerren's hand rested palm up on the stone between them. He did not reach. Brannelle placed her hand in his by choice. No flowers bloomed. No magic announced significance. His fingers simply closed around hers, warm and careful, while she mourned. That ordinary touch became more intimate than the spectacle in the throne room. At dawn, the listening seed revealed its cost. The gray stain had spread across half its shell. Each time Brannelle used it to absorb corrupted consent, it transferred the unspoken pain into her memory. She now remembered fragments of lives she had never lived. A boy agreeing to service so his sister could eat. A widow surrendering land beneath armed witnesses. An elf without a house accepting exile rather than prison. If the seed filled completely, those voices would erase her own. Faerren wanted it locked away. Brannelle refused. "My mother carried this for decades," she said. "She did not preserve it, so we could protect ourselves from hearing. And she did not preserve it, so you could disappear into other people's suffering. Then help me use it without disappearing." They devised a rule. Brannelle would never touch the corrupted root alone. Faerren would ask her questions only she could answer. The smell of her childhood kitchen, Messina's worst habit, the first treaty she translated, the color of her mother's shawl, personal memory would anchor her while the seed listened. Their first attempt took place beneath the palace in the Well of Ascent, where the Concord's main roots circled a basin of dark water. Brannelle pressed the seed into a black fissure. Voices engulfed her. "Your name?" Faerren asked. "Brannelle." "Your first paid translation?" "A wool tariff." Both sides lied about moths. "Your mother's shawl?" "Red. No, brown after too many winters." She insisted it was red. The darkness receded from one root. Then a stronger memory seized Brannelle. Queen Iliel on the night of her death, confronting Aurelian at the well. The chancellor held Faerren's unconscious body above the basin with roots around his throat. "Approve the emergency covenant," Aurelian told the queen, "or your brother dies." Iliel signed. The Concord accepted the signature as consent because the old magic recognized words, not freedom. Blackness flooded the well. Aurelian released Faerren, then drove a glass blade into Iliel's heart. Before dying, she broke her crown and sent half its living power into the empty chair, creating the death song to prevent Aurelian from installing a controllable equal beside the next sovereign. The vision shifted. Brannissa carried the seed away while Iliel's guards burned the Western records. Aurelian found her at the boundary and marked her with ward blight, but she escaped into human lands. Brannelle tore her hand from the root and collapsed against Faerren. He anchored her with questions until she could speak her own name again. When she told him what she had seen, grief did not make him silent. It made him precise. "Aurelian cannot control the Concord alone," he said. "He needs decrees bearing the sovereign seal. Since my coronation, he has placed every emergency measure before me. Then your authority has been feeding the poison." "Yes." He removed the crown from his head. The black root circlet tightened in his hands, resisting separation. Blood appeared where its thorns had rested against his temples. He set it on the stone floor. "Until the houses are exposed, I issue no command through the crown. Will the court obey you without it? We are about to discover whether they ever obeyed me at all." The fourth day brought false victory. Before the noble electors, Brannelle translated each euphemism in the children's bonds into plain speech. Guardianship became captivity. Contribution became seizure. Witnesses entered one by one. 3 houses abandoned Aurelian, and the chancellor was arrested before sunset. For one hopeful hour, the western ward brightened. Then every gate in the city sealed. Aurelian had expected exposure. His imprisonment completed a hidden clause in the emergency covenant. If the chancellor were detained during ward failure, authority transferred not to the king, but to the noble houses collectively. The palace roots seized Faerren and dragged him into the throne chamber. Across Sylvaren, every bound servant felt the green ink in their contracts ignite. Their forced obedience became a weapon. Brannelle reached the Hall of Branches as roots pinned Faerren to the throne. The empty chair waited beside him, its white flowers now black. Aurelian walked free between kneeling guards. "You mistake me for the disease," he told her. "I am the physician." Sylvaren survived because someone made decisions while weak rulers asked permission. Humans multiply beyond our borders. Rootless elves dilute the houses. Consent is a luxury kingdoms cannot afford. "Then why preserve the chair?" Brannelle asked. "Because symbols make submission beautiful." He ordered her to surrender the seed. The courtesy shackles descended from the ceiling, dozens of them, ready to bind every witness in the hall. Faerren fought the roots until the black mark covered one side of his face. "Run, Brannelle." She hated the command even though it came from love. "Ask," she said. Understanding reached him through pain. He had spent his life protecting by deciding for others. Now even sacrifice could repeat the corruption they opposed. "Will you leave while I hold the roots?" he asked. "No." Aurelian laughed. "There is your precious consent. Useless." Brannelle faced Faerren. "Will you trust me with the seed in the chair?" He looked at the black blossoms, then at the human woman whose will the forest could not seize. Trust required him to surrender control without surrendering responsibility. "Yes," he said. Brannelle sat down for the second time. The death song entered her fully. Iliel's grief swept through the chair, vast enough to drown an elven mind. Brannelle did not resist it. She listened. The queen had not stored only pain. She had preserved the original covenant beneath later laws, a simple exchange between forest and people. Protection could arise only from freely shared responsibility. The listening seed opened in Brannelle's palm. Its roots pierced the chair and reached for Faerren. He could have withdrawn. Instead, he placed his hand over hers. The bond between them did not form automatically. The magic paused, asking in a language older than command. Brannelle heard its question as possibility. Would she bear the kingdom's voices if she could never rule them? Faerren heard another. Would he share power even when her choice opposed his own? They answered separately. Yes. The chair's black flowers turned white, but the ward did not cleanse. Aurelian had anchored the poisoned covenant in thousands of contracts. One pair's consent, however sincere, could not replace the freedom of everyone bound beneath them. Brannelle understood the final requirement. The people must revoke it themselves. They cannot reach the well, Faerren said. But the well reaches them through every contract. Aurelian lunged for the seed. Faerren broke one arm free and caught him, but the effort drove a root deeper into his chest. Brannelle used the chair to send not a command, but a question through the Concord. To every servant, debtor, soldier, ward, tenant, and minor house whose agreement had been taken under threat, the forest whispered, "Do you freely sustain this covenant?" Across Sylvaren, voices answered no. The sound was not spoken aloud, yet the city shook with it. Green signatures vanished from contracts. House gates opened. Bound children felt their marks cool. Soldiers lowered weapons they had been ordered to raise. The black water beneath the palace surged upward through the roots, carrying a century of false ascent back toward the people who had profited from it. Aurelian screamed as the Concord showed him every life compressed into his elegant laws. Brannelle felt the seed try to absorb the same flood. If it did, she would disappear. Faerren released the chancellor and reached for her with both hands. "Brannelle, your mother's shawl." "Brown," she gasped. "Messina's worst habit. She steals blankets. The Treaty of Moths. There were no moths. Why did you sit beside me?" The question cut through every borrowed memory. She saw the feast again. Messina pale with exhaustion, nobles avoiding the king's side, one chair transformed into a weapon by collective fear. She remembered Faerren's eyes when she sat, not cruel but lonely in a way the entire court had agreed not to name. "Because everyone had decided emptiness belonged there," she said, "and I did not." The seed released her. Instead of holding the kingdom's pain inside one person, it divided into thousands of white sparks. Each returned a memory to its rightful owner and gave witnesses the ability to speak it without magical punishment. Truth ceased to be Brannelle's burden alone. The roots fell from Faerren. He collapsed beside the chair, the black mark retreating from his face. Aurelian tried to invoke the emergency covenant, but no voice answered. His power had never been strength. It had been obedience disguised as inevitability. The people arrested him, not the king. not Brannelle, kitchen workers, unbound guards, minor clerks, rescued wards, and nobles who understood that neutrality had ended. They carried him from the hall to await an open trial under laws not written by the accused. The ward still trembled. Removing poison did not repair the damage it had done. Cracks of night opened above the western boundary, and creatures called hollow stags stepped from the space between forests. They were shaped like deer made from absence, drawn to places where memory had been erased. Behind them, the valley villages began to vanish from the map. Faerren could restore the barrier only by reclaiming the crown. If he put it on before the Concord was remade, the old sovereign bond would close around him forever. Brannelle could stabilize the seed only by planting it in the western valley, but once rooted, it would force her to hear every future violation of consent within the kingdom. Their victory had changed the mission, not ended it. "There is another choice," Faerren said. "We dissolve the royal anchor. The ward would no longer consume one sovereign. What would sustain it? Local covenants, thousands of them, freely renewed. The noble houses will resist. Then I may be the last king of Sylvaren." He said it without martyrdom. The throne had defined his duty, not his identity, and Brannelle saw how much it cost him to separate the two. "If the crown ends," she asked, "what remains of you?" "A man who owes a great many children an apology." He touched the edge of her hand. "A brother who must tell the truth about his sister. And, if she wishes it, someone who would like to know the woman who argues with enchanted furniture." Brannelle turned her palm beneath his. "She may permit that." Their first kiss did not occur in the throne room. There were too many wounded people, too much work, and too little certainty. It happened hours later on the road west, after they left the palace with Messina, a company of volunteers and no royal procession. Rain had begun. Faerren struggled to fasten the plain cloak that replaced his ceremonial coat because one hand remained numb from the roots. Brannelle silently fixed the clasp. He thanked her. Neither moved away. "May I?" he asked. She knew what he meant and appreciated that he asked anyway. "Yes." His mouth touched hers gently, without magic, prophecy, or witnesses demanding significance. Desire had grown through disagreement, grief, work, and choices neither could make for the other. The kiss promised no easy ending. It promised presence. Then Messina shouted from the wagon that hollow stags were eating the road, and romance yielded to survival. The journey to the Western Valley took 2 days through warp distances. Human iron pins held unstable paths in place. Elven rootcraft bridged living chasms. At a fork where every path looked identical, Brannelle noticed white flowers turning toward her mother's 7-note song. She sang badly. The company followed the flowers. At the valley, they found the hidden villages surrounded by hollow stags. The creatures were not predators. They consumed erased history because absence was the only food humans and elves had given them. Fighting would scatter them into the city. Brannelle planted the listening seed in the soil, where Branisa had once stood beside Queen Eliel. Nothing happened. The seed required a memory freely offered by both peoples. Not confession forced by a court, but truth surrendered without control over how it would be judged. Faerren stepped forward before anyone could be chosen. He told the villagers that he had allowed fear to preserve a lie about his sister. He named the 6 elves who died in the chair and accepted responsibility for using their deaths to strengthen his image. He described every decree he had signed without asking who paid for it. When he finished, he removed the broken crown from his pack and laid it in the soil. Brannelle offered her own truth. She had spent years believing silence kept her safe and morally clean. She had translated agreements she knew were unjust because accuracy was easier than intervention. At the feast, she sat partly for Messina, but partly because the king's isolation angered her. She had recognized another person using quietness as armor and wanted, for one reckless moment, to challenge him. The seed sprouted. A white tree rose between them, its branches carrying leaves of glass. Each leaf held a memory offered voluntarily by someone in the valley. Humans told of children taken. Elves told of famine hidden by proud houses. Mixed families spoke names erased from both records. The hollow stags approached and ate not the memories, but the silence around them. As they fed, their empty bodies filled with stars. The boundary began to close. Then, Aurelian's final trap awakened. The broken crown lifted from the soil and wrapped around Faerren's throat. He had authored the emergency clause, but Eliel's coerced signature still powered it. The covenant demanded a sovereign sacrifice to seal the ward. Faerren's body rose from the ground. Roots of black light pulled him toward the opening sky. Brannelle grasped his hand. The listening tree showed her the mechanism. Eliel had signed to save her brother, and the magic had recorded her act as willing sacrifice. To undo it, Faerren had to reject the life purchased for him. He could die now and close the boundary, or live and leave the wound open. The old story offered only noble deaths. Brannelle refused its terms. She called to the villagers. The covenant believes one life must carry everyone. Do you consent to that? No, Messina answered first. Hundreds followed. The white tree spread its roots through their joined hands. Each person offered not a life, but a small share of strength. One memory, one promise of labor, one season of tending a boundary stone. The cost divided until it became responsibility rather than sacrifice. The crown loosened. Faerren fell. Brannelle caught his shoulders, and together they drove both halves of the crown into the earth. Silver wood dissolved into the roots. Across Sylvaren, the central throne cracked from top to bottom. The night above the valley sealed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the star-filled stags walked into the renewed forest, carrying recovered histories in their antlers. The western villages appeared again on every map. Faerren lay in the grass, breathing. The black scar at his throat had turned silver. Brannelle knelt over him, furious with relief. "You nearly became a tradition," she said. "A terrible fate. If you ever attempt solitary sacrifice again, I will personally restore the monarchy so I can depose you." He laughed, and the sound startled everyone who knew him only as the feared king. Back in the city, Faerren convened local assemblies to form transparent covenants with the right to withdraw. The houses lost hereditary control of the wards. Aurelian received an open trial, and Brannelle translated every proceeding. She refused a permanent title until the assemblies defined its limits. Then she became first listener, empowered to expose coercion, but never to command. Faerren remained king for one transitional year because dismantling a throne required more care than seizing one. He opened Eliel's archive and published the truth rather than turning his sister into another harmless monument. Their relationship caused controversy, but they did not answer it with a wedding. They maintained separate work and visible choices, so neither magic nor rank could impersonate devotion. They argued over policy and whether his habit of standing behind her chair looked protective or possessive. "Protective," he insisted. "Move the arm." He moved it. Trust survived because it was practiced in details. One winter evening, exactly a year after the Feast of Returning Stars, they entered the Hall of Branches together. The throne was gone. In its place stood a circular table assembled from the wood of every district. No seat was higher than another. The old Concord chair remained near the wall, restored but unchained. Its white flowers opened whenever someone spoke a difficult truth without being forced. Visitors still avoided it from habit. Faerren had surrendered the crown that morning. He wore no black mourning coat, only dark blue embroidered by children from the shelter. Without the throne, he seemed neither smaller nor less formidable. He seemed more fully present. Brannelle found him looking at the chair. "There is one place left," he said. "That sentence has caused enough trouble." He offered his hand. "Then I will be clearer. Will you sit beside me at the assembly, not as my subject, symbol, cure, or appointed equal, but as yourself. Brannelle considered him with theatrical seriousness. On conditions. Warm laughter moved around the circular table. Faerren smiled openly now. Name them. You listen when I disagree. I listen when you are afraid instead of pretending you are merely severe. Neither of us uses love to avoid accountability. And if there is only one chair, you stand. Agreed. There were, in fact, 2 chairs. They sat together as the doors opened to humans, elves, mixed families, former servants, old houses, cooks, soldiers, artisans, and children who had once been counted as property. The assembly was noisy, inefficient, wounded, and alive. No enchanted harmony silenced disagreement. The renewed forest brightened, because consent was not the absence of conflict. It was the freedom to remain a person within it. Later, after the final argument ended and the hall emptied, Faerren and Brannelle returned to the old chair. Its carved vines had grown around the mark left by her first frightened hand. Brannelle touched the wood and heard Iliel's voice one last time, no longer trapped in grief. You did not crown the silence. The queen's presence dissolved into white petals. Faerren bowed his head, and Brannelle stood with him until sorrow became something he could carry without building a kingdom around it. Then he asked whether she wished to leave. She said not yet. They remained beside the chair, where fear had once demanded emptiness, their hands joined without magic holding them there. The place no one dared occupy had not been waiting for a fearless woman or a king's destined mate. It had been waiting for 2 people willing to choose each other without surrendering themselves, and for a kingdom brave enough to understand the difference.